Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Crystal. I'm the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, Fordham University, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you to the 2023 Fordham Distinguished Lecture on Disability. Let me start with an access note. There are ASL interpreters for this event. You can pin their video to keep them on the screen. We also have CART captioning. To access this, click on Live Transcripts and then Show Subtitles. If you have questions about access during the event, you can message rcd@fordham.edu. This year's event was also made possible through the support of Fordham's Chief Diversity Officer, Rafael Zapata, who you'll be hearing from shortly. We'd also like to thank our co-sponsors for the event, the Office of Multicultural Affairs, the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Program, the Graduate School of Religion and Religious Education, the Peace and Justice Program, the English Department, the Center for Community Engaged Learning, the Office of Disability Services, and the Graduate School of Social Services. We're very excited to have so much interest in this lecture across the university. This is Fordham's 7th Distinguished Lecture on Disability. This event is organized by the Disability Studies Program and the Research Consortium on Disability. The Disability Studies Program examines historical, cultural, economic, physiological, and socio-political perspectives to unpack the meanings and effects of disability. It was launched in spring 2019 to provide students with a background in the ways the concepts of disability and normality are understood in different times, spaces, and cultures, and to provide them with practical knowledge of how to conceptualize and produce more accessible built and social environments. The minor offers students an interdisciplinary way to engage with questions about the meanings and experiences of disability through coursework, on-campus events, and participation in the broader disability studies community in New York City. The Research Consortium on Disability, RCD, coordinates and supports disability-related research at Fordham to help guide the world on a path towards inclusion. The faculty affiliates of the consortium are scholars in the humanities, in the social sciences, education, law, and social service, doing research in disability studies and disability and health-related fields. The Disability Studies minor and the Research Consortium both have websites where you can find more information. And please also feel free to email rcd@fordham.edu. Before I introduce our distinguished speaker and moderator, Rafael Zapata, Chief Diversity Officer, will make some remarks. Rafael?
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you everyone for being with us today. Our office is extremely proud to be sponsoring this year's Distinguished Lecture on Disability. I want to thank Professor Sophie Mitra, Professor, Laura Wernig, and Professor Rebecca Sanchez for all their leadership and work in making this happen. They work humbly but tirelessly to move these efforts, especially at the faculty level, at the curricular level, around our enhanced institutional understanding of issues of disability and disability justice. As Chief Diversity Officer, I've always been motivated by a question of justice. How do we make higher educational institutions more just, more accessible, so that wherever people are coming from, whatever their backgrounds, whatever their identities, that they're able to fully participate in the life of the university or college, as well as be their full selves and thrive, not simply exist, but to thrive. It's absolutely consistent with our Jesuit mission of cura personalis, care for the whole person, not just certain parts. It is up to us to fully understand members of our community, and where we may fall short, we have to learn to better serve them, understanding that whether you're a person with disability, a person who comes from a low-income background, a person from any other marginalized group, that we will strive to understand you better and do better so that you may be your best. And of course, questions of disability do not exclude or include questions around racial identity and justice, class, gender, etc. because they can't be considered separately. So we have to look at the questions of disability justice through an intersectional lens. And just as importantly, looking at disability through a strengths-based model, not one rooted in disability pride, as opposed to a deficit-based model. The ways that we think about serving persons with disabilities in the classroom, in our dorms, through our human resource policies, for example, typically, most often help everyone, regardless of their status, their ability status. So keeping that in mind. And then finally, what does it mean at an institutional level? It means creating a culture of inclusion around issues of disability, and specifically focusing on how we design our campus, reflecting on how language is used, building our capacity, not faculty, staff, and students to better understand the diversity within the broad community of persons with disabilities, ensuring that technology is accessible, and also streamlining accommodations processes, making it less inconvenient or not inconvenient at all when you need support to do what you have to do as a teacher, as a staff person, or as a student. And with that, again, I'll restate how proud we are to support this year's lecture, and I'll pass it back to Jonathan Crystal. Jonathan?
Thanks, Raphael. Turning to this evening's activities, tonight's event will take place in two parts. The lecture will be approximately 45 minutes and will be followed by a Q&A with the audience through the Q&A chat box. So you can submit your questions in the Q&A box. The interview and the Q&A will be moderated by Dennis Tyler. Dennis is an associate professor of English here at Fordham. His work on African-American literature and culture, disability studies, and popular culture has appeared in numerous journals, including African-American Review, Journal of Literary and Cultural Disability Studies, Gender Space, The Feminist Wire, Oxford Bibliographies, and American Literary History. He has been recognized with grants and fellowships from the Ford Foundation, Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, Woodrow Wilson Foundation, Social Science Research Council, and the University of Virginia's Carter G. Woodson Institute for African American Studies. He's the author, most recently, of Disabilities of the Color Line, Redressing Anti-Blackness from Slavery to the Present. Thank you, Dennis, for moderating. Now, let me introduce our distinguished presenter. We are thrilled to have with us this evening Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha for their presentation on disabled freedom portals. Leah is a non-binary, femme, autistic, disabled writer, space creator, and disability and transformative justice movement worker of Burgher and Tamil Sri Lankan, Irish, and Galician Roma ascent. They are the author or co-editor of 10 books, including Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice, The Future is Disabled, Prophecies, Love Notes and Mourning Songs, Beyond Survival, Strategies and Stories from the Transformative Justice Movement, co-edited with Ejeris Dixon, Tonguebreaker, and Body Map. They are the winner of Lambda's 2020 Jean Cordova Award, which is given to a writer committed to nonfiction work that captures the depth and complexity of lesbian queer life, culture, and/or history, and a 2020 Disability Futures Fellow. Since 2009, they have been a lead performer with Sins Invalid, a disability justice performance collective. Raised in Rust Belt, Central Massachusetts, and shaped by Toronto and Oakland, they are currently at work at building Living Altars, the Stacey Park Milbern Liberation Arts Center, a home for disabled QT BIPOC writers. Next year, Fordham is excited to be hosting a reading group on Leah's work. And for more information on that, please email rcd@fordham.edu. We will also be including the link to a forum where you can express your interest. Okay, so without any more delay, I will turn it over to Leah. We are so looking forward to your talk.
Oh. Hi, everyone. First of all, I just want to thank you so much for having me here to talk about the disabled free future. It's a big deal. I never take it for granted the opportunity to speak and to be together with other disabled kin. So thank you. And I want to really thank Laura, Rebecca, Sophie, Jonathan, Dennis. I already said Rebecca's name, I think. Everybody who put years of work into making this space happen. I know as somebody who's a first generation university graduate and somebody who's been in and out of the ivory tower and community spaces all my life, how much work goes into carving out liberatory spaces in universities. So thank you. Events like this don't just happen. And I'm going to try not to waste your time. Okay. I also wanted to extend a really warm welcome to all of the disabled, chronically ill, neurodivergent / diverse / neurospicy, mad, deaf, and hard of hearing folks who are here, including I'm seeing some really beautiful disabled kin and family. Thank you for showing up. I'm so glad you're here. I also want to welcome folks who are here who might still be in the place of, I'm not sure if I should call myself that. And I want to extend a generous disabled welcome that you get to come on in. That disabled spaces are way too often gatekept by doctors, families, teachers, the government, you name it. But we whose bodies are disobedient in the best ways know who we are. And we know that there is no power to be gained from keeping anyone out. We build power together. And a little access note, I'm going to talk till around 6 p.m. Eastern, and then we'll open it up. Please feel free to be disabled in public. Do not wait for me to tell you to go to the bathroom. Please go ahead and do whatever you need to do and do all the access things that you need. I also, it looks like I can't send it to everyone, but I'm sending a link to hosts and panelists. If someone could copy that link and send it to everyone, it's an access copy of my talk. So if you want to read along, you can. It's in a Google Doc. Yeah. And to introduce myself, my name is Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm coming to you right now from Western Massachusetts on Nipmuc and Pecumtuck territories. Not too far from where I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is a small Rust Belt city where industry was born and then died. And I've spent my life in many cities, including New York, as a scholarship kid from 1993 to 1997. It's a real honor to be speaking at Fordham. To visually describe myself, I'm a light-skinned, mixed-race Sri Lankan, Ukrainian, Irish, and Roma, non-binary femme in my 40s. I've got brown, silver, and lavender curly hair on one side of my head, and I've got an undercut on the other. I've got a bold lip, and I'm wearing earrings that are pink and black broken hearts held together with gold, because anything broken can be wired together and you can make it gold, which is a disabled practice. To introduce myself and why I'm here, I'm a writer and cultural worker and someone who's had the great good luck to be involved with the disability justice movement for the past 15 years this year. And to give a definition and an opening for folks who might be new to the term disability justice, for me, I want to name disability justice as a way of thinking about and doing disability organizing and community and culture that was created in 2005 by a small group of radical disabled people, Black and Asian, poor white, queer and trans, and gender nonconforming. They wanted to fill in the gaps left behind by the disability rights movement, which had been groundbreaking and life-saving, and also often focused on laws, policies, and white experiences and leadership, as opposed to an intersectional understanding of disability that centers the lives and leaderships of Black, brown, queer, and trans disabled people. In disability justice, disability issues are about who is disabled and Black and brown and poor and locked up in prison or shot by the cops. We know that 50% of Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are murdered by police are also disabled, deaf, or neurodivergent. And these murders happen at the place where racism and ableism meet. So to be an abolitionist, as I am, and to fight to win abolition means that you must be invested in disability justice. Disability justice says that colonialism is a disability justice issue because the violence that comes with land theft, resource extraction, toxic waste being left on Indigenous land and communities, and disabling experiences coming out of that toxicity, and Indigenous experiences of disability being cut out of mainstream disability rights spaces are all disabled issues. Gentrification is a disability justice issue because almost everyone living in a tent or an encampment who got pushed out of rental housing or maybe never had it is disabled, mad, neurodivergent, sick, and got pushed out because we were too much or because capitalism makes it hard to make a living and survive as a disabled, multiply marginalized person. I could go on. I encourage everybody to check out the 10 Principles of Disability Justice at Sins Invalid's website. There's a link in the access copy, and someone could also stick it in chat if they want to. I also want to say that disability justice, for me, is very much not a movement made up out of some special expert disabled people. Our whole movement is made out of marginalized, multiply marginalized, depressed, disabled people organizing out of the conditions of our own lives, whether it's two people talking to each other on a Discord, talking to each other from our beds, talking to each other at the kitchen table, talking to each other on the stroll. We are starting with the capacity and the spoons and the disabled brilliance we have. There is no such thing as not having enough to give to be a part of this movement. And I define disability as encompassing anyone who is disabled, chronically ill, neurodivergent, mad, deaf, or more than one. And that's been 33% of the United States for a while. And as many people like Dr. Sami Schalk, S-C-H-L-A-K, or I might have mispronounced, S-C-H-A-L-K, my bad, author of Black Disability Politics, have mentioned, it's now pretty damn close to being a majority of the population that's disabled due to the vast numbers of newly disabled people through long COVID and PTSD from the last 3 years of the pandemic. This is an expansive definition of disability that is welcoming, that says that we are a big and fractious community, that there is room and kin for you here, us people who are beloved, kindred, and needed. I have had my life saved by other disabled Black and Brown people who shared their stories with me, taught me how to be disabled, remembered, not forgot me when I was sick year after year after year, mailed me meds in the mail, and organized to save each other and everyone's lives in times of climate emergency, fascism, and eugenics. Sorry, maybe I should skip this. I'll just put it in. I've been autistic since I was born, even though I only figured it out when I was 41. I got chronically ill and disabled when I was 21. And as a young neurodivergent survivor of violence, I was so lucky that I found communities of other young disabled survivors who were involved in punk, anti-Giuliani, and queer and anti-police brutality organizing in New York, and later in the psychiatric survivor movement in Toronto. None of us were experts, but we all know that we are experts on each other, our own lives, and we have so much to learn from each other, especially when it's hard and especially when we've been kept apart from knowing each other. So this talk is about the freedom portals we make as radical disabled people. And if there's anything you take away from this talk, I want you to take away this. As a disabled person, you are needed. If you're not disabled, you're also needed to learn from, support, and lift up disabled leadership and organizing in these times. Imagining disabled futures that are free is always an act of resistance because we are not even supposed to survive to a future. We are not supposed to be free, and we are not supposed to have a right to decide what that freedom consists of. We are supposed to be grateful to not be dead and for the bare minimum. And it is especially an act of resistance right now to demand our right to control our bodies, minds, lives, joy, liberation, futures, because the stakes are incredibly high. I'm here to tell you that I know so many of you are already fighting like hell, and we have to keep fighting like hell. Everything's possible to win, and everything depends on what we do now. Because we are in the middle of a time of active fascism and eugenics, and fascism is always built on eugenics. From white settler colonization using smallpox blankets as biowarfare to murder Indigenous North American people. to Nazi Germany beginning their fascist assaults in one part by demanding that family members of disabled children surrender their children to be murdered. We fast forward to today, to 2023 North America, where we are told by the state and institutions that as disabled people, we do not have a right to be in public. And that's whether that's about the statement of CDC Director Washo Walensky in January 2022 that, quote, most people who've died of Omicron had pre-existing conditions, i.e. disabilities. So that's very encouraging news, which is something she actually said. Or about the present government refusal to continue to require masking and testing. So if we want to stay alive as high-risk people, we're told that we need to stay in our homes, that we are not allowed to go on the bus, in the bookstore, the cafe, the government offices with the unmasked ones. And both of these actions tell us that our lives as disabled, high-risk, and immune-compromised people are not worth protecting. Or maybe it's about the actions of someone like New York City's mayor, Eric Adams, who recently, as many of you know, stated that he's attempting to push so-called severely mentally disabled people institutions or Rikers against our will, stating the public doesn't want to see that. And I'm here to say that we disabled and mad people, we say we are the public. We are the public and we are not going back to being locked up. This moment of COVID backlash against disabled lives exists side by side with the current attempts at trans genocide, attacks on all forms of bodily and land sovereignty, attacks on Black and Brown people's rights to live, backlash against the Black-led uprisings and resistance against anti-Black state murderers in 2020 and beyond, and our collective calls in 2020, since then and long before then, to bend the arc of the world to a care-abundant, liberated future. I'm here to say it's so important for us to remember that none of these attacks are separate. The connections between fascism, ableism, trans hatred, racism, all forms of oppression are crystal clear. And to give some examples, when Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp signs SB 140 into law on March 23rd, that was a little over 2 weeks ago. This is a law banning the right of trans youth under the age of 18 to access most gender-affirming care they have autonomously chosen as things they know they need that brings them freedom and liberation in their trans selves. And at the same time, this law protects the right of the medical industrial complex to force treatment on intersex youth and children without their consent. The law contained a clause claiming that part of the reason they think this ban is needed is, quote, gender dysphoria is often comorbid with other mental health and developmental conditions, including autism spectrum disorder. Okay. I'm here to say, as one of the millions of the non-binary, trans, and/or gender-queer autistic army, I'm here to first of all say, fuck yes, there's a lot of us autistic, non-binary, and trans people out there. And we are not a comorbidity, we are a freedom song. We are the future and we are the present. And it is clear the state is terrified of us. It is terrified of autistic, autonomous trans people and non-binary people who love ourselves and know that we are the own authorities on our bodies and minds. Free people are hard to control. People who have said, fuck you to the medical industrial complex, we define what we want. We are hard to control. And there is so much militant organizing and resistance, especially led by trans young people who are incredibly brave, throughout the South and beyond right now, and destroying the encroaching fascism in trans bans requires a militant anti-ableist analysis as well, because it means understanding that ableism underpins all attacks on our right to bodily autonomy. In the ableism and trans hatred of the above is a deep fear of what happens when we get to have the power to decide what our bodies need. It's not something for the medical industrial complex to decide, oh, we can make money off of it. We're the experts. We're the ones who say yes or no to you. When we say we have the power, not the patriarchy or the state, we are seizing power. And we know that what they know is that it means that they're going to be making a lot less money off of it. Asian American revolutionary activist Grace Lee Boggs, who is also disabled, was famous for asking the question, what time is it on the clock of the world? What she meant was every revolution comes out of specific, unpredictable moments of time and place. I've been asking myself and other people a lot lately, and I ask you, what time is it on the clock of the disabled world, of your disabled world? And often my answer, and a lot of people's answers have been, it's a time of what the fuck do we do now? I swear a lot. If you know me, you know that. I hope this is okay. A lot of us are asking, what do we do now? A lot of us are frozen. A lot of us are grieving. A lot of us are exhausted from our whole lives, but from the last 3 years, and 3 years before that of Trumpism and rising fascism. Out of this uncertainty, we often ask ourselves privately at night, how are we supposed to make the revolution? I want to say that's real, and I want to say that exhaustion, grief, living with long COVID, being completely uncertain, these are all disabled spaces of possibility, not just oppression. I've been involved in disability justice movement for a long time, and I have witnessed over and over again that we have done our best and most life-saving dreaming as disabled folks in the moments of what the hell do we do now? When we're in our hospital beds. I wrote Some of the Future is Disabled when I was in the ERs waiting to see if my ovary was exploding. I wrote a lot of it from bed with Post-it notes by the side of my dresser. From when we're stuck in pain and isolation, from that moment when we're furious when the fourth bus with a broken ramp drives by and leaves us in the cold, or the captions are forgotten again. Disability justice people are people who continue to dream wild, messy dreams and fumble towards making them happen in the midst of times of extreme peril. And that fumbling, that lack of perfection is a disabled gift. There is such a push often to say we can't do movement work unless it's perfect. We do messy, life-saving work. And to give some examples, I saw this during Trump. I was on tour with Care Work, and I would go to some college campuses in person. And I often would wear a t-shirt that had "The Future is Disabled" on the front, and it's made by disabled Latina creator Annie Segura. And I'd wear it to these gigs in 2018 and 2019. And at a certain point, I'd be like, okay, so close your eyes. I want you to imagine the accessible future. What does it look like? And much of the time, there would be crickets. And people would just be like, I don't know. The best I can imagine is maybe we're not dead. And that's real. And yet during the same period, disabled people were the people I saw constantly finding ways to organize courageously and creatively through our fear. 2018 was the year when me and my friend William Maria Rain, who is a true disability justice OG, a badass queer Arab disabled organizer who's been doing this since the 90s, we organized a 2-week-long performance festival called To Exist is to Resist, where we asked disabled, queer and trans, Black and brown people, do some writing about how our disabled Black and brown ancestors survived fascism and colonization. Because if we're here, we know that not everybody died. We know that some of us lived. And I want to lift up my friend Lucia Leandro Jimeno, who's a Black Latinx trans disabled organizer, who is one of the people who organized spaces like Fierce and the Audre Lorde Project in the early 2000s, like really early queer and trans Black and brown spaces in New York, who passed away. It's going to be 2 years next week. He made a performance ritual about being a Black Latinx disabled trans god who was worshipped. Because we need imagination and pleasure and love to reach towards the future. Those were the years where disabled people successfully fought and won the fight to save Medicaid, Obamacare, and the ADA, with actions like those of Carrie Ann Lucas, badass fat femme Latina disabled mom and lawyer, who pulled the wire she used to control her wheelchair out of the socket, and she used her body as a barricade to hold the cops off for 72 hours as disabled people filled government offices in Denver, Colorado. She told the cops, you can Google it. You can Google how to fix that. These are examples of how our bodies are not liabilities, they are weapons. And normal people could never figure this shit out. When wildfires first started hitting the West Coast, fueled by climate emergencies in 2017 and 2018, disabled people were the people who already knew how to use masks. I want to lift up my friend Bayani, who is a Filipina disabled queer person with multiple chemical sensitivity, who taught so many people just through Facebook, here's what all the different masks are. No one knew what an N95 was back then, but people with chemical injury did. There's so much grassroots knowledge and mask sharing. And here's how you survive when the sun's been red for 3 weeks. Here's how you survive in detox that came from disabled people. Disabled people distributed tens of thousands of masks for free through organizations like Mask Oakland and Power to Live. We didn't wait for permission, we just did it. In these perilous times, I often go back to the phrase, disability justice dreams got me this far, and I'm going to keep betting on them, which is said by my beloved friend and comrade, the great Stacey Park Milbern. Stacey was a Southern working class, Korean and white, queer disability justice, one of the best organizers I've ever met, one of the best organizers of her generation. And that phrase was something that came out of her experiences risking everything when she was 23 years old, and she was a badass organizer. And she was living in North Carolina in the military community that her family's from. And North Carolina, until last month, did not sign Medicaid expansion. So her family did all of her care. And they loved her and she loved them, but they were fundamentalist Christians who were not cool with her being queer. And she was like, yeah, I was literally hiding gay books in the wall and stuff like that. And then I looked up one day and I literally remembered Oprah saying, no one's coming to save me. And she put all of her chips in, risking everything to move across the country to Oakland with another disabled queer Korean friend, raised money on the internet years before crowdsourcing was common, and moved 3,000 miles to live a wild, disabled Asian queer life. And it wasn't a straight shot. It wasn't just like, oh, it's happily ever after. She risked a lot doing that. All of us here know that there's completely wild shit we've pulled off in the most dire situations. And we keep moving forward because what else are we going to do? Because we owe our ancestors and our future people. And because we have the ability to say, fuck it, and keep going when we're in the unknown. During the early pandemic, I want to call in, these are all freedom portals, by the way. Everything I'm saying is a freedom portal. During the early pandemic, we saw how everything could be different, how access features that disabled people had fought for years were there in an instant when everybody needed them. Outdoor dining, captions, immune compromised hours at the grocery store. Oh, you can't fly because you're sick. Don't worry, you get your money back. Universal basic income, expanded benefits, expanded EBT, rent moratoriums. Everything was different. Everything can be different. Everything has to be different. We also saw so much disabled survival, freedom, ingenuity in everything from, hey, I left some soup on your front porch, to I'm mailing you masks. I know you're in New York and they're all sold out, but there's some at the hardware store in my neighborhood. Watch parties watching Crip Camp on Netflix. Friends in New York who are disabled started Crip Fund and raised tens of thousands of dollars to support disabled Black and Brown people who were in dire situations, including people who had been cut off from their benefits because the Social Security office was closed and they didn't have a phone or an internet connection. Friends in Oakland started the Nobody is Disposable Coalition, a coalition of disabled, fat, and/or elder people who crowdsourced material about how to survive COVID as high-risk people when the government was telling us it was a cold and no one should wear a mask. Alice Wong, founder of the Disability Visibility Project, started online campaigns like High Risk California, protesting that even when vaccines became available, we were told as disabled people we were at the end of the line, not the front of the line, even though many of us had not left our homes for over a year, period. We successfully won the fight to reverse this exclusion. These are just a few examples of the freedom portals that we have created, and I'm lifting them up because to be disabled is to both be so hypervisible and invisibilized. I often say that the powers that be want to erase that we exist when we're alive, and then erase it even more after we die. It's so hard for people even people who are in the movement, but often people who are not, to learn about and remember disabled struggle, disabled organizing, disabled communities, that what we did happened and mattered and saved each other. And I want to say that some of these things may sound like huge campaigns, and you might be thinking, I can't do that. But literally bringing someone a bowl of soup is disability justice. Literally refusing to forget each other is disability justice. Two people on a Discord is disability justice, asking if we've eaten that day. And because the work of envisioning a radical disabled future must be from all of us, it's something that we learn and practice together. I'm going to give you homework, and maybe I can send this out later. I don't expect you to do it now. But since we're here together, I want you to take a moment. I'm going to ask you to imagine what your free disabled future looks like. No big deal. There's no way to mess this up, and there's no grades. But I want you to think about it's 7 years from now. That's the year. That's what I've learned is the amount of time it takes every cell in the human body to die and be reborn. You can stop and close your eyes. You can take a breath. Notice where you're at right now, what body you're in, what spirit you're in. Being disassociated is fine. I really hate it in spaces where people go, feel your body. And I'm like, I can't feel shit right now. I want you to notice what grief, what rage, what curiosity you might be feeling. I want you to think about the last 3 years, and I want you to think about something that you learned, some way that you survived. Maybe you want to think about something that you're mourning too. Just anything that sticks out in your memory. Just hold on to that. Just take a minute to go there. And I want you to start thinking from that place of something that you did, something that you're remembering. I want you to think about it's 2030, 7 years from now. What future do you see? And it's okay if it's not rainbows and unicorns. And it's okay if you're like, I don't know, the planet's dead. But just humor me. Try and imagine there's something that's as wild as right now would have seemed to you 7 years ago, where maybe we made it. Maybe we made something brilliant happen. It can be small, it can be big, it can be a wish, but I just want you to think about it. And we're just going to do it a little bit now, because you can come back to this anytime you want. So when you're ready, come back. I was like staring at my phone being like, okay, a minute sounds good for an online thing. So a couple of weeks ago, I was feeling something and I was like, what is that? And then I was like, oh, it's been 3 years since the pandemic started. And I spent 2020, 2021, 2022 in Seattle, which was the North American epicenter of COVID, right? It was the first place that community spread was tracked. And even though we were told it wasn't happening. And I think because of that, we were outliers and early adopters in my disabled friend group, community network in Seattle. And there's something that I like to call the art of disabled pessimism, which is we already know that we're going to be abandoned. We already know the system is not going to work. We are not surprised by it. We know the oops of, oh, wow, there's no wheelchair lift in the evacuation bus. And we have a lot of really intense stories of disabled abandonment in our head. And I'm thinking of the many people in long-term care and nursing homes in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina who were not only left to die, some of them were euthanized by hospital staff because they just couldn't figure out how the fuck to get wheelchair users and people who need adaptive equipment on a helicopter to be evacuated, right? I think about how I said recently, I think that we're always prepping, even though there's not a ton of disabled people in like far right-wing prep community for reasons that are obvious. And whether that means like you save back your meds if you get a prescription you don't need, or you buy an extra can of beans when it's on sale, Or you figure out, like, what do I do if my care worker doesn't show up? I'm thinking about every wheelchair user I've known who's like, yeah, I've got a yogurt container by the bed in case I need to piss. What will happen if there's a power outage and I can't run my ventilator or keep my insulin cool? And out of that, we're also innovators, and we are early adopters of the survival skills that we will need to continue to use to be able to move forward. And I want to tell the story that some people may know of Nick Dupress and Alejandro Ospina. So 11 years ago, when Hurricane Sandy hit New York in 2012, as some of you may remember, Nick, who was a wheelchair user who used medical equipment that requires power, and Alejandra, they lived on the 12th floor of their wheelchair accessible elevator building in Manhattan. And when the power went out, they were stuck up there and they were like, okay, so how are we going to keep this powered equipment going? And when that happened, there was a crew of disabled friends and allies who walked up and down in the dark on those 12 flights to swap out batteries and take them to the local fire station to charge. That was a decade ago. And I know that we, and I mean disabled people in New York, but also disabled people all over, because I wasn't living in New York then, but I was on the text thread and I was listening to friends that I knew who might be on this chat actually, or on the Zoom, who were all chiming in, supporting each other, problem solving, being like, what do we do now? We were paying attention. And we've been building it on it over the past decade as smoke storms, power outages, floods, water emergencies from Jackson to Philly keep happening. In the words of my friend Sam Alon to their friend Callie Anderson, these are two disabled white folks in Scotland, about their mutual aid during COVID, we maybe weren't going to save the whole world, but we were damn sure going to save each other. And I believe in that. I believe in that when I'm like, I can't save everybody, but I can be a part of saving parts of my community. The small things we do become big. I'm thinking of another survival story of the year after Stacey moved to Oakland. It was 2010 and the Fukushima nuclear reactor melted down. And there was all of this fallout. And there were so many people in the Bay Area who were like buying up all of the detox herbs from the health food store. And friends of mine who were Japanese and Okinawan were like, y'all are assholes. Like, you are not at risk. People in the Pacific Islands and Southeast Asia are at risk. And I was talking with Stacey about it because we were like, wow, this is getting real. And she was like, you know, quite honestly, my plan to survive disaster has always been to lie down and die. Because she's like, my batteries run out in my power chair. I've got a trach. I don't assume that anyone's coming for me. And the story I tell a lot was, I just heard that. You know, I don't have the same kind of disabled body, but I heard that. And I thought about my own experiences of being left behind, you know, being at the end of the protest march, being told, get better soon, being at the top of 2 flights of stairs in the only apartment I could afford. And our little disabled community in 2010, long time ago now, we got together at this local pizza bakery that was wheelchair accessible that my friend Remedios worked at, and we could be there after hours. And we talked, and we really just started from where we were. And we created this thing that I would share with you, but it still has people's actual names and addresses in it, so I'm not going to. But it was like a 2010 Google map we called the Apocalypse Survival South Berkeley Oakland map, where we were like, okay, if communication goes down because the wireless goes out, we're going to meet at this one traffic circle, and we've buried, you know, pens and paper in a mason jar. So let's meet up there the day after, and we're going to leave messages for each other. We started doing the work of how do we make our way through this? How do we survive? How do we innovate? How do we share the one wheelchair accessible van that we have and fit 13 people into it and take the back roads to get out of Oakland? And that's a little thing. And, you know, there hasn't been a big earthquake yet, knock on wood, in Oakland. Fukushima didn't reach us in the ways we maybe were anticipating. But 9 years after that, as the wildfires were hitting Oakland and as Pacific Gas and Electric, the utility company, abruptly announced that they had decided they were just going to shut off power to all of the East Bay. And, if you're disabled, you can call this 800 number. We'll try and help you. And no one picked up. I believe that meeting in that pizza restaurant, that organizing, that resource sharing, that, what do we do? Is some of the bones of what became the hashtag Power to Live campaign, which was a big coalition of disabled folks who had been building with each other in Oakland, who were like, okay, this one house in Richmond, they've still got power. Do you need help? We set up a phone number. You can text us, you can call us, you can TTY us, you can chat with us, you can email us. We'll figure out how to get what you need. You know, people who didn't even live in Oakland being like, I figured out a way, I researched a way you can keep insulin cold for 5 days if you just need dry ice and 2 clay pots. They do it in North Africa. Here's this method. And that building led to a year later, the No Body is Disposable campaign and all the mutual aid that we did in early COVID and throughout to be like, hey, I can't go to the grocery store, but you're not immune compromised. Can you double mask and pick me up some cheese so I can eat? I'm saying this all not to say that these are heroes or exceptional people or exceptional cripples. I'm saying that we are deeply ordinary, overlooked people who are all brilliant in our own ways, and we have the seeds and the power to survive, and then through that survival envision freedom. One of the big disabled slogans is to exist is to resist, right? That so much of the time we don't look like capital O organizers, but the things we do to stay alive is disabled organizing. I believe that. When we feed each other, when we keep each other alive, when we survive smoke and fire and evacuation and gentrification through our mad genius, it opens up room to not only survive till freedom, but to feel what freedom feels like. Freedom is something I felt in those moments of disabled love and disabled survival, disabled mutual aid and disabled community building. I have felt unstoppable in those moments, and it has given me the feelings of hope and power and creativity that I need to keep building liberation in my communities. I'm just like, I'm always like, I'm going to run out of time, but I'm like, we got 15 minutes left. Okay, so I'm going to talk for 13 minutes more, and then we're going to do question and answer and communion. But I wanted to also segue a little bit and say that part of the what the fuck that a lot of people are feeling is, I know a lot of folks are like, wow, there was so much organizing happening in 2020 and 2021. Why can't we get it together now? And I want to say that when I said before that grief is a disabled space, I think that we have to hold, not dismiss, that we have all of this grief inside of us that we are still processing. And it's not just something to get over or an impediment. I had someone say to me recently, I'm sorry you're struggling. And I was like, I'm not just struggling, I'm also becoming. I'm in an incubation space where I am digesting the grief of people I loved who I lost to medical abuse and neglect and ableism, to people who maybe didn't die of COVID, but they died because they were afraid to go to the hospital. That was never a safe place for them. I am lying on my couch digesting this grief, and like a lot of us are, and I think out of that, we are going to figure out the kinds of organizing that we're doing next and that we already are. I'm trying to be curious about my grief. I'm trying not to be sick of it. I'm trying to ask it what it's got to tell me. We can ask it and our ancestors what resistance it compels us towards. Grief is seen as a feminized, disabled, weak thing. And viewing it as not a mess to be cleaned up, but something to learn from is some of the disabled wisdom I keep needing to remind myself of right now. It doesn't make sense or be rational, but these are not rational times. And I still believe in the disabled future. And I'm going to read a segment from The Future is Disabled. Crip bodies were built for space travel. Crip minds already push the outer limits. Alice Wong, founder of the Disability Visibility Project, tweeted in 2016. We already master usage of breathing apparatuses, and we can handle challenging situations. Wired magazine had a 2020 article about the buried history of disabled and deaf people who were selected as some of the first astronaut trainees because deaf people were less likely to get nauseous and already use sign language, because pooping is a major problem in space, and it is so much easier when you already have a colostomy bag. Disabled and deaf game. The brilliance within our divergent body minds helps us take root amongst the stars. to paraphrase Octavia Butler, Black science fiction wizard, and someone I claim as neurodivergent kin. As disabled white Jewish queer writer Carrie Kaufman recently wrote, "Where do you, the abled, go when you leave us behind? Is it worth it?" This is a real question. I know my answer is no, it's not worth it. At the core of my work and life is the belief that disabled wisdom is the key to our survival and expansion. Crypt genius is what will keep us all alive and bring us home to the just and survivable future we all need if we have a chance in hell of getting there. I think this continues to be a time for crypt creativity and curiosity. And this is not on script, but I'm going to share it briefly and pause. I was thinking a lot about disabled forms of direct action. I'm a new part of a coalition of disabled and radical medical and elder organizers in Massachusetts who have been fighting to try and keep the mask mandate in healthcare because it's one of the last places we have where we can go safely, right? And we had our press release, we had our press conference, and it was good. But I was just wanting to punch myself because there's, a slideshow that's like, why are masks important? Because COVID is airborne, and there's a diagram showing it. And I was like, how do we have to keep saying this? It's 2023. And after I got off the phone, somebody who was one of the organizers was like, messaged all of us saying, we need to think about what we can do next that we haven't tried yet. And I was like, I have some ideas. And I've been thinking a lot, as a lot of folks are, about the AIDS activism of the 80s and 90s, and in particular, the radical direct action of ACT UP and other groups. A lot of people have talked about during the times when various federal governments did not care that Black, brown, queer, trans, IV drug using, sex working people were dying of AIDS. There were many people who, when they died of AIDS, did a form of protest where they were like, take my ashes to the government buildings and drop them on the lawn. And the government did not see that coming. The government did not see it coming when a whole bunch of faggots and drug users and queer and trans people and sex workers took over St. Patrick's Cathedral. Yeah, they didn't see that coming. We have the element of surprise, and I've been thinking a lot about back in the day when I was 20 years old and Giuliani was mayor, and he announced that he had this terrible budget that was going to eliminate all funding to AIDS services in 1995. And this is before cell phones and mostly before the internet, so we were able to pull this off. There's a big coalition of every radical group. I think everyone from ACT UP to Malcolm X grassroots movement. And we had an action where the day he announced the budget at 5 p.m., we went to the Midtown Tunnel, the Manhattan Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, I think like maybe the Holland Tunnel, though that would scare the hell out of me. Basically 4 of the major entry and exit points in Manhattan at rush hour. And we walked into traffic and we blocked traffic for 2 hours and nobody could get in and out. And we got our coalition message out against Giuliani, and they did not see that coming. And the cops were pissed. And some of the more seasoned white ACT UP gay guys had been like, oh, don't worry, we'll be out in 2 hours. And they kept us in the tombs for 3 days. And we actually had to lawyer sue to get us out because they're supposed to only keep you for 48. I'm not leaving you with any kind of simple just do this, but I am leaving you with these tantalizing, hopefully, stories of rebellion and disabled freedom. And I leave you with the question, where do we have the element of surprise? What are the skills you have in yourself, in your communities, in your anger, in your grief that you can mobilize to do some shit that can shake things up so that we can get to the freedom that we need? What is the power we have, and what grounds us in remembering what it is? How are you making the revolution irresistible? How are you invoking the future? How are you telling the hard and the joyful story? As a disability justice recruiter, as I often call myself, I will keep saying, we need all of us to keep doing this work as spoons allow, 1 spoon at a time. We need what all of us will invent in terms of genre, artwork, story of the survival that has not been invented yet. And I want to end with a quote from Patty Byrne, one of the founders of Disability Justice and co-founder of Sins Invalid, where she says, "Disability justice holds a vision born out of collective struggle, drawing upon legacies of cultural and spiritual resistance. Within 1,000 underground paths, we ignite small, persistent fires of rebellion in everyday life. Disabled people of the global majority, Black and brown people, share common ground confronting and subverting colonial powers in our struggle for life and justice. There's always been resistance to all forms of oppression, as we know in our bones that there has also always been disabled people visioning a world where we flourish, a world that values and celebrates us in our beauty." And in my last minutes, I'm going to say some ideas that I have about where are we at in 2030, if I can find them. Give me 1 second. Yeah, last night I was asking myself, what if in 2030 we had bioregionally controlled climate crisis support networks, climate refuge zones with air purifiers or safe spaces from floods or tornadoes, plus heating and cooling, networks that activated to bring food, herbs, and supplies to folks who needed them. What if our regions had broken away and invested in Indigenous people who know how to do controlled burns to steward land and abate wildfire risk? What if land back continues and there are Indigenous and Black controlled land bases that have robust, accessible housing, healing, and cultural spaces? What if there's so much grief that disabled grief stewardship skills have grown and there's networks of death doulas, grief doulas, grief kinship and support all over where it is normal to be grieving? What if social media completely collapses and people turn back towards each other in different ways? What if we continue to build our safer networks, build neighborhood and virtual councils and networks? What if people lean on their disabled mesh webs, Discord, signal threads, and snail mail? What if there's zine distribution hubs in the cloud and also in different independent media centers, bookstores, and neighborhood little mutual aid bookstores on my block? What if when the next pandemic hits, all those mutual aids go back to life and this time they never stop? What if there is everything for everybody? What if there's mass food distribution and connections between farm and land bases and cities, inside and out, making sure that we survive? What if Crip art continues to have a renaissance and the hardest parties are outdoors, inside with high-tech masks that we build from 3D printers for free, lying down and online? What if the Stacey Park Milbern Liberation Art Network has at least 6 to 8 different spaces that move around between different land bases depending on what fires and floods are happening that year? What if there is so much disabled and deaf and neurodivergent Black and brown art and creation that's come out of those spaces where people have built new art, created genres I don't even know that exist yet, fallen in love, and Crip the possible? What if the CARE Accords passed in liberated territories mandating that every human being and non-human being has a right to receive good, accessible, autonomous care from community networks or people who are paid well and valued for their work? I love having a big imagination. It's part of why I'm crazy and disabled, and I know that you do too, and I'm so excited for the freedom that we will imagine together. Thank you so much for having me. Much, much, much love. That's it. Heart reacts all over.
Wow.
I know.
This is
Pretty
Dennis
good.
Tyler speaking. I just want to say thank you so much for that wonderfully rich and generative talk. I'm going to see if there are any questions coming into the chat. Oh, we already have one. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see it as well, or should I read it?
If you could read it out loud, that'd be great.
This question is coming from Nicholas Lawson. The question is, can you talk about what kind of angry activism you would like to see from disabled and allied faculty, tenured, non-tenured, and adjunct, and from students on college university campuses today?
Yes, I would love to share that. So first of all, I want to say that I think the university is both a hell pit and a place that so many people try and carve out liberated spaces. And so many people I know who are in different places in academia are really struggling right now because they want to kill everybody. Like they want everyone to be an adjunct. They don't want to have any COVID abatement. They don't want to have any access. They don't want to pay anyone anything. You already know. And I think there's immense power, even though it feels risky, to refuse to obey. And I'm thinking about different student strikes that I've seen. The New School's one that comes to mind. I think that it's private college. I mean, little fun fact, I went there in 1995. It used to be $10,000. We did a lot of student activism because it's not $10,000 anymore. We were like the last generation of Black and brown working class students who got a full ride. And it was before it became the Sarah Lawrence of, the village. Shout outs to Jackie Alexander, my beloved professor, who we fought to get tenure there. I learned a lot. I think that it's never a good time, and it's always time to be like, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to keep doing virtual. If we all do virtual, you're going to fire all of us. We are going to keep fighting. I will say that, in some universities, there's an access center that is fighting to defend the needs of disabled students, faculty, and staff, and that's great. And there's a lot of places where the access center is a gatekeeper that is there to defend the interests of the university and make a lot of money. So they are not always our ally. When they are, that's great. When they're not, I am really, I'm emboldened by hearing about different disabled and allied faculty who go, I don't give a shit if you have proof from a doctor. Maybe you can't afford to go to the doctor. If you have an access need, we will work it out, right? I see so many professors radically cripping their spaces right now to be like, everyone's depressed. Everyone had 6 people die. Everybody's sad. Everybody's tired. Nobody can afford eggs. Great. We're going to slow down and change how things work. But so backing up, what kinds of angry activism? I think angry, loving activism, where it's about screw these tuition increases, screw these attempts to crush unions. Let's bring unions back. Right? Like, let's fight for the rights of disabled students to be able to stay and have our access needs. Let's not have it be a thing where when students' access needs aren't held, you're told, oh, you get to go on medical leave and lose your housing, your scholarship, your job, and your health insurance. Like, I'm talking everything from student strikes, direct action sit-ins, tuition strikes, all of the above, militant protection, occupations of space. And I also want to say that those are things that take a lot of energy, and it's not always something that people can pull off in the moment. So when people continue to create liberated zones in their office, in their classroom, in their advising office, in their student club, that's really important. Where there is food, there is tampons, there is equipment, there is love, there is care. And we need both. We need the anger, we need the mourning, we need coalition stuff. I was not in SLAM, Student Liberation Action Movement, back in the 90s, but I had a lot of friends and roommates who were, and I was part of the CUNY coalition that fought to defend public education. Every single thing we fought for, whether we won it or not, it was worth it because it helped push back against it being so much worse than it could have been. And it kept hope alive that freedom is possible and that the right to a free education that is accessible is a right. And I don't know if this is direct enough, but I want people to not just argue for crumbs. Let's argue for the whole thing. Why not? What do we have to lose at this point? We might as well, right? And let us not abandon disabled students, faculty, and staff as we're doing it. I know a lot of people who are involved, for example, in New School organizing, who are disabled, who are like, wow, some people had my back and some people really didn't around my needs to be able to be in that space safely as things were negotiated. Do not take disabled wisdom and then sell us out. That's one thing. That's one piece of my anger. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for that response. I mean, that was amazing. Thank you for reminding us not to ask for crumbs and to ask for the whole pie. And also for reminding us that anger and mourning are proper, effective responses and forms of resistance. Okay, a bunch of questions are coming in now. The first is from Melissa Taylor. How do I claim my power as a disabled MSW?
Totally. So, a lot of people are in that position, and it's like the double-edged sword where it can be easier. I'm not saying this is your experience, but I know a lot of people become MSWs because it's an easier, more accessible way than some other forms of becoming a therapist or a care worker, right? But then there's all these rules in place around, ooh, you've got to be a mandated reporter now, or ooh, you've got to do such and such. And I come from a tradition called it is possible to lie. It is possible to refuse to mandate a report. It is possible to have a fifth column in your agency that goes, let's think about how we want to do this, for example. It is possible to be like, if what the policies are where we work are like ableist and about like, let's make people be normal, or let's be the grease that smooths down resistance. It's possible to be like, what if we actually switch it up so that we're actually going to be, as much as we can, be allies, right? Shira Hassan, who is an incredible Arab Jewish, longtime New Yorker, used to be harm reductionist. Please check out her book, Saving Our Own Lives, Laboratory Harm Reduction. I've heard her speak a lot about how social workers are often in a place of oppressors, and they also are in a place where there can be some harm reduction ways of being a social worker. It may not ever be able to be the full revolution, but there's some ways that you can use your power to advocate for the people you work with instead of seeing them as clients to be managed, right? I can't tell you what to do. I don't know your individual situation besides this question, but I do think about, for example, how important it's been for me to see care workers and providers who name themselves as disabled and who say, yeah, I learn from disabled community. I learn from disabled strengths, and I'm here to be somebody who's in accompliceship with you, as one thing. I also think, please check out the mandated reporting is not neutral project that Shannon Perez Darby is working on. She has some really amazing resources by and for radical social workers. And it also makes me think about my friend Carly Boyce, and I can put these in chat in a second, who has written and shared about being a radical queer abolitionist social worker, and who's done work with their local social work licensing board, because they were like, that stuff that says we have to call the cops when someone's a danger to self or others. Actually, this is in Ontario, so it may not be true everywhere, but they're like, it actually, when I look at the rules, it says we have to tell somebody. It doesn't have to be emergency services, which can yank people dead. And they went to their, like regional, like social worker gathering, and they were like, how about we change our bylaws to be like, instead of you got to call the cops, who then might kill somebody who's suicidal, it's, hey, why don't we change it to, we've got to talk to our client and be like, I need to work with you to figure out, is there someone safe who you trust, who you can disclose this to get support, that does not have to be about being locked up in a mental ward. Those are changes that can make concrete differences in people's lives, right? Because on the flip side, I know people who are like, my therapist is a social worker because that's who Obamacare covers, right? And like, I don't have $140 for like self-pay. So I am seeing this MSW and she's better than nothing, but I am worried about how much can I disclose. If there's ways we can make demands of the system we're in while also trying to destroy it, and claiming our disabled identities in there, I think those are some places to start to build power. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, the next person is Rachel Chambers. I think it's more of a comment. Leah, how wonderful. I think of Judy Heumann, who said, our anger was a fury sparked by profound injustices, wrongs that deserved ire. And with that rage, we ripped a hole in the status quo. Not sure if you want to respond to that, if I should.
Yeah, I can respond briefly. There's a question right after that by Alex I want to make sure to get to, but I will say, yeah, I think disabled anger is a powerful force. It is something we have going for us because often able-bodied people just think we're nice cripples and they get real surprised by us being angry. And I also want to name that, there's a difference in how white disabled anger is received and Black and brown disabled anger is received, right? Like, as Black and brown people, our anger is already seen as violent and scary and a threat in different ways. And it, in a racist colonial society, it makes us more vulnerable to, being killed. So I think that there's some complexities in there as we think about and try and conceive of disability justice organizing, because, white disabled folks can look like nice, harmless people in wheelchairs who are angry and, ooh, we should give them something. And with Black and brown folks, we have different histories of facing violence, both from police and families, institutions, and honestly within disability rights community. So there's some stuff to tease out in there that's really important. And now I want to answer Alice's question. Would you mind reading it out loud?
I can read it, yes. Alex Severin asked, how about students that don't state their disability in university because of their traumatic life in the past and eventually become aware of the student's disability, sends him to a mental hospital by force, and after being released is suspended from the university for initially a year and a half. And then it's subsequently extended to 3 years after an appeal meeting, but this meeting without the right of an appeal. And then this development came from a dean that laughed at the fact that this student went to a special education school and believed the claims of an adjunct professor and threatened them with expulsion, even if there's a lack of evidence of such claims. This has happened to me in this institution as a disabled student, with the university being aware of this since August and has documents to prove it. That's from Alex.
Yeah, Alex, I just want to say, this is totally inadequate, but I just want to say, I'm sorry that happened. It's complete bullshit. And I'm glad that you were able to share your experiences of being expelled and all of this crap in this setting. And to go back to like, what kinds of angry disabled activism do I hope for? This is something that needs to be organized around, right? Because this is it, like this, and I want to say that this is so, unfortunately, so typical, right? Like there are so many disabled and neurodivergent students who face exactly this kind of crap, right? And some places where I personally have overlap in experience, like I didn't disclose my disability in undergraduate because of my traumatic past, and because at the time, I was both told, this is before Obamacare, that if I disclosed anything, I would lose my insurance and lose my scholarship because I wouldn't be seen as, you know, like, what do you call it, credible or whatever, right? So the university is a place, I know I said stuff, but it can be, there's people pushing for it to be a liberatory space, and that's real. And I think that one of the places that disability comes up over and over again, and ableism comes up in universities, is that it's supposed to be a place for smart, sane people. And that if we are people who are, you know, people who, anything from we're in special education programs to people who have different developmental, intellectual, learning disabilities, or people who are mad, we very quickly have stuff deployed at us that says, you're not supposed to be here, right? You're not smart enough. And there's immense pressure that we're told very explicitly that we can only stay if we are smart and we pass and we don't make trouble and we don't make demands of the university, right? And when we cannot do those things, there's an immense amount of violence that gets unleashed on us. So this is one of the places where I hope that there are people on campus, off campus, who can be in solidarity with you in pressing for what you want in terms of redress and accountability for this situation, and that you get to have the right to access your education accessibly, right? Whether that's people on campus, folks involved in mad movement spaces in New York and beyond, or more. Yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you. Next up is a question from Emily Krebs. Thank you so much for this talk. I'm so thrilled that Fordham hosted you for this event. As a disabled faculty member, it's difficult to see so many campus groups who are invested in liberation, but failing to support COVID precautions. We don't have a mask mandate at Fordham, and the vaccine mandate is also ending. All of this is occurring while Fordham sends weekly emails about cura personalis and caring for the full person. Do you have any tips for approaching Catholic spaces, specifically with crip justice?
Yo, that is a very good question. My mom is a casualty of Catholicism, and I ran from it as quickly as possible. Let me think about that. I mean, the first thing that came to mind, and it's not a Catholic thing, is something that I've been thinking about a lot, is the importance of uplifting examples of places where no matter what the government says or the administration says or whatever, that people are like, we're choosing a mask. You know, everything from, it's small, but it's not. Like, there's a coalition of medical systems, hospitals and whatnot, in and around Seattle and Tacoma and the Puget Sound region, who all said the other week, they were like, we know that the federal COVID emergency is going away. We are going to keep requiring masks in all of our hospitals. And like, there was a lot of union organizing with SEIU and beyond, and disabled organizing that went into that, because it was a coalition of disabled, medically vulnerable people, and also hospital staff who were like, we don't want to die at work, so we're going to keep doing this. I think just knowing there are examples of that helps my mental state. And I also think offering those as examples, being like, you do not have to go along with the okie doke. Like, you can actually just say no in a way that Nancy Reagan did not mean. Like, that's a big example. And I also think about, there's examples I can think of every place from, I mean, I did a gig at Brown University last month, which is, elite Ivy institution. But it wasn't the whole campus, but like, their Black studies, women and gender studies, et cetera, departments were like, we're going to keep masking, and here's why. And we're like offering, hey, you can't afford masks, great, we'll use some funds to buy them, things like that. And I think also, like, I see some community colleges just being like, screw it, we're going to keep doing it too, because we know that most people who go here are broke and vulnerable and like really, and have suffered in particular racial and economic ways from COVID, right? So I think making demands, I think calling their bluff, I think just like naming that this is crap and just like, yeah, calling them out on like cura personalis and being like, where's the cure? This is not, Jesus would have worn a mask, okay? Jesus would have worn a goddamn mask and he would have turned the water into masks. I don't know where that came from, but I'm just going to say it. I don't know, the Catholic thing is complicated for me because honestly, my family has been hurt so much by Catholicism. My mom is a survivor of sexual abuse within the church that I think that when I think of Catholicism, I know it can be a force for liberation. And for me, I'm in touch with the parts that are a force for abuse and genocide. So in some ways, it's not surprising to me that there's that hypocrisy, right? And I know that there are Catholic radical and progressive Jesuit traditions that are about mutual aid, love and care, and radical hospitality, right? So maybe being like, we have a choice, right? Do we want to be the genocide church or do we want to be the other one, right? Like, the time is now. I mean, AI is about to take over, like, do the work of Jesus while you still can before the robots are controlling everything. Yeah.
That's right. Rachel wants you to know that she loved what you said about the small things we do become big. And I think Nicholas has a follow-up, or maybe
Okay.
not. I'm not sure if Nicholas has, but are there specific issues / problems where you think marginalized communities could do a much better job of realizing common cause and forming productive coalitions? Can you think of any unnecessary conflicts?
Oh, sure. How long you got? This is kind of my bone to pick, or one of my bones to pick, since I got involved in disability justice is, in some way, I've seen progress, but I still get frustrated, and I've written essays to this effect about how parts of the non-disabled radical left, including the radical Black and brown left, still have like a squick factor when it comes to disability. And the pandemic changed that some, but there's also a lot of ways that people are like, we want to go back to normal. And I have more room for it sometimes, and don't jump on me, I'll explain what I mean, than when it just is like, like Chad and Becky in the suburbs or whatever, because I know people who are in neighborhoods where like tens of thousands of people died, and who are like still, they're just like, yeah, I still got to go to work as frontline worker. And you know what? I am going to go to the club, and maybe sometimes I don't wear a mask because this is how I'm just trying to stay alive. And I'm like, I get that. I do. I really do. And I think, but I keep yelling at, the non-disabled identified Black and brown left to be like, you can't abandon us again. You can't just have us be the flavor of the moment in 2020 and 21 and then be like, oh, what disability? That's so last year. Especially because I will keep saying this is not the last pandemic. And honestly, I think the next one is not going to be that far away. So we're still going to need to know about washing our hands, wearing masks and viruses in 5 years, right? In order to be able to organize. So, and I know it comes from internalized ableism. I know it comes from the ways in which, for many of us who are Black and brown, it has not been safe to claim disability because we've got so many other oppressions already on the table. And we've been really taught, just suck it up, don't ask for help. It's not going to be there. Be strong. We come from histories of medical experimentation and institutionalization that are really painful. And for years, when a lot of people were like, yeah, I would kind of peek at disabled space, but a lot of times it was all white people. And I was like, I don't really see myself there, right? So I think solidarity is really important. And I'm really heartened when I see leftist community spaces saying, as an act of love, we're going to continue to mask. And I want to encourage people, if you've given it up, it's like smoking. You can always quit again, and you can always go back to meeting outside, wearing masks, air purifiers, asking people to test, like all of those things. And I want to own that it is scary to be, I know that when the pandemic started, I didn't ever think it was going to be over in 2 months, but I thought, okay, maybe in a year and a half, vaccines. My mom's a polio survivor. Vaccines, there's not polio so much anymore because people got vaccinated. I was not expecting that people would be like, fuck a vaccine in the ways that they did, right? And including some parts of the left, including some healers who are like, oh, I just keep a high vibration. I don't need that. I digress. But I will say that, internalized ableism will also literally kill you. So it's worth it to do that unpacking. I'm not saying that to you. I'm saying it to the groups. Yeah.
Couple of comments, and then I'll get to the last question. Alex wanted you to know that he's an artistic African descent.
Awesome.
Melissa Taylor says nobody talks about when a beloved care worker dies.
No, they don't. They really don't. And it is a really particular grief, and I'm so sorry. I'm also seeing Sabrina has a question.
Sabrina, yes. Sabrina says, hi, I'm a disabled healthcare researcher of color, working on making healthcare education include content on disability justice. Disabled folks have a complex relationship with healthcare, in that healthcare simultaneously sustains and abuses us. Do you see any ethical issues in applying disability justice as a framework in healthcare education, practice, and research?
I mean, as long as it's not defanged, no, I don't see any ethical issues at all. As long as, a lot of disability justice folks who've been in this for a long time, including like Leroy Moore, lots of other folks have talked about, like Patty Byrne, like a while ago was like, wow, they're starting to put disability justice on cornflakes, it's like people are like, oh, this is the new thing. And she's like, we're an anti-capitalist movement centering the lives of Black and brown, queer, and trans disabled people. Sorry, I'm going to slow down, my bad. I think that when people water that down or erase us as a militant movement, as an anti-capitalist movement, as an anti-colonial movement, when people are not clear that we are not your father's Oldsmobile, then it's a problem. But no, I think that actually bringing DJ into healthcare education is really important. And it's also going to be challenging because it means bringing up, hello, medical abuse, hello, like, everything from, medical stripping to people literally being left to die, right? People literally being told our lives aren't worthy, to talking about how, Persimmon Blackbridge, who's a Canadian psychiatric survivor, queer writer, there's a line in one of her books where it's two characters who are on this radical mental health listserv, and one of them says about the DSM, it's not an art and not a science either. They change that shit every 5 years, which they do, right? Like, I don't know if people remember oppositional defiant disorder, right? That was a disorder. Oh my God, it's seen in a lot of Black and brown young men. They're just angry. Why could that be? That was really big in the 90s and 2000s. It still might be. That's a made up disorder saying that Black and brown masculine people are too angry. That's racism, right? So to bring DJ to health education means to basically rip up a lot of the DSM. It means to say that, like, I want to say, and this is a thing that's been a tension, I think, between some parts of radical healing justice and disabled communities, because there doesn't have to be a tension, but in some healing justice spaces, there can be this ethos of like, yep, Western medicine is evil and cruel and, violent and all of these things, which it is. And we just need to go back to, traditional medicine and everything's going to be fine. And I'm like, I love acupuncture and I love herbs and they really help me. And I also really need pills. And so do a lot of people. And my friend really needed a new kidney, and we did not necessarily have that 2000 years ago. So we need both. And what I want is a future of radical healing that has both, where we get to have gender affirming surgeries on demand, where we get to say, I want specifically this chest, and don't tell me I need to lose weight or be more normative. Where as disabled people, part of the factors that contributed to Stacey dying was that she was a wheelchair user, a power chair user. She had a trach, and she worked for Wells Fargo as her day job. She's like, I'm English speaking. I have a college degree. I have platinum health insurance. Stanford University was still like, oh, we don't have a wheelchair accessible gurney, so we can't do your pre-surgical tests. This is in the first world, you know, with somebody who has a lot of access, with citizenship, right? We need a future. I know this isn't not necessarily what you're speaking of, though I think it is, but like, in order to do health education, we need to talk about stuff like that. We need to talk about the everyday disabled realities of being denied care and of us being told that people know our disabilities more than we know ourselves. I would love healthcare research into all of my disabilities that has something other than take ibuprofen. You know, I mean, I would love that. I would love the kind of funding for my shit that went into Viagra, you know? So I guess if you're asking for advice, talk about all that, you know, talk about not pushing cure, talk about the reasons that you named that as disabled people, and I know you're disabled and you already know all the shit that I'm saying, but like, talk about the reasons why the healthcare system is a place of violence and also a place that we have to interface with, and talk about us as experts. We got 5 minutes.
Yes, it looks like we have 2 more questions. Should I read them back to back, or do you just want to
Sure.
do one? How do you want to? Okay.
Well, how about you do one and we'll see how far we get?
Okay, the first is from Erica. How can disabled academics partake in resistance when we are already vulnerable to being kicked out of our programs for being disabled? How do we balance, quote unquote, laying low to preserve our sources of income and healthcare with the need to participate in protests and resistance against eugenicist policies? All I want to do is be loud and unapologetically disabled, but if I piss off my department one more time, I might have my funding pulled.
Yeah, that's real. That's real. I don't have an easy answer for that. I will say that what comes to mind is safety in numbers, and that's not easy either. That when we build solidarity, when we build coalitions, I was just thinking of Bernice Johnson Reagan's famous line in Coalition Politics Turning the Century, where she said something like, God, the only way that you go to coalition is because it means working with people who could kill you. It's just like, the only reason you do that is you're afraid you're going to die if you don't do it. And these people might save your life because there's going to be enough of us. I think that it's that thing of become ungovernable, where if we make a ruckus with other people, we also have to have demands of other people to be like, you have to show up for me. You have to have my back. You have to make some noise if they try and retaliate. I mean, that is the heart of union organizing and collective action, is like, if you come for one of us, you're going to speak to many of us. And I think it does go back to like, okay, what are the things that we don't have control or power over? But also, where's our power? Like, they need us to teach. They need our money. They need us. I know it can feel like, oh, there's a million of me to replace me if I quit, or if I get fired rather. But I wonder about that sometimes, if it's like, I've been pushed out, you know, don't take this job. You know, I mean, bad publicity is still something that universities fear a lot, because they're like, oh, when there's bad publicity, you know, parents don't want to send their kids to school there because that's the school with the ruckus, right? And I also want to really name that fear. And I think that we are in a deeply imperfect and complicated situation. We do the best we can. And there can be, I don't know, can you be the fifth column? Can you do all the photocopying? Can you like get the money and say it's for something else? I mean, I was always like, let's steal as many computers as we can while we're here, guys. Or whatever. I didn't say that. But like, what are ways that we can expropriate resources? And yeah, maybe you can't be out on Front Street or have your picture in the paper or get arrested. Are there other ways that you can support that are going to be protective of your income and your health insurance? Right? Like, these are some options. These are some thoughts. And Benjamin.
Last but not least, thank you endlessly. When COVID continues to show our society's commitment to eugenics toward disabled people, how do we build coalitions when base level trust and affirmative consent around COVID practices are absent, even in leftist spaces?
We make our own. We make our own, and we build and we pull things off. We find the people who are committed to masking and who are committed to anti-eugenicism, and we start. I think that one of the primary strategies I've seen disability justice deploy for a long time now, I mean, I'm going way back. I'm going, 15 years ago, where we were like, we're not going to fight. Back then it was like, well, we could fight with white disabled people who are racist, or we could actually turn towards other disabled BIPOC and not have a millionth meeting trying to convince, you know, the head of the SIL or ADAP not to be racist. Like, we can actually build power with each other, because that's complicated enough. And then maybe they'll come knocking, or maybe they'll fuck up so much. Maybe when those spaces get sick again, they'll be like, oh shit, y'all have a point, right? But then we'll have our own autonomous base of power. I also think, like, it's horrible, but like, people are kind of, like, they're susceptible to peer pressure. So sometimes when we build power where we are strong with other people we have common cause with, and we go, hey, we're all still masking at the demo. We're all masking here. It's required. We're going to do this. People go, oh, I guess maybe we could do that. Like, the number of times I've interfaced with a space where they go, oh, we don't know if we can ask people to mask. And I'm like, you can do anything you want. And if you want this, you're going to make that happen. And if not, I don't have to show up, right? If they want us, they need to do what is going to ensure us and everybody to survive. And if they don't do that, they don't get us, and we get ourselves. God, I didn't even have coffee today. This is pretty good.
And we are at time. Leah, thank you for such a wonderful talk. Please join me in giving Leah all the love, all the hand claps, all the good vibes. I want to turn back to the organizers to see if they have any final words before we close out.
I just want to personally thank you for joining us. And this was so fantastic to have you speak here at Fordham University. I'm going to put in the chat one more time, if folks are interested in joining this book group based on Leah's work. We're going to be distributing materials in the summer, and we'll get started in the fall. So please sign up if you're interested. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Leah.
Thank you. Last but not least, I just want to say that the future is disabled because of community popularity and people spreading the word is going to go into its second printing already. It's just been 6 months. And Sandy Ho, who's an amazing queer Chinese, Taiwanese disabled organizer, she's making a reading guide for it, which has a lot of questions and discussion prompts and things like that. And that's going to be out with a new edition. So for your book club, I know you got your own questions, but please feel free to check it out. It'll be free on my publisher's website, Arsenal Pulp. And I just want to thank the access workers, Jana, Susie, and I'm not able to see the cart worker's name, but thank you, cart worker. This was held so excellently and beautifully. And thank you to Dennis, Raphael, Laura, Rebecca, everybody. I know I'm forgetting names. And for all of you who took time out of your day to be here. And I really hope that this gave you something. And I am looking forward to just witnessing more of the disabled organizing and freedom that y'all are creating on and off campus. So thank you so much. Shanti, thank you, Shanti. And I can't see who's heart reacting, but thank you for the heart reacts. And thank you to all the friends and family who showed up. I'm just saying TL Park. I'm going to miss people. People are going away. Like, hi, everybody. Alice. Liz. Also, people I don't know, I love you too. Thank you for being here. And please keep loving and fighting, especially in these times, especially in New York or wherever you are. But I'm thinking about New York under this administration, and the right to take up disabled space in public and in private is crucial. And I believe in us. I really do. I believe in us organizing. I wouldn't even necessarily call myself an organizer, but I got thrown into movement spaces by people who welcomed a little 20-year-old who didn't know shit, but who was angry at, Giuliani and Pataki and racism and ableism. And we all have the knowledge of our lived experiences, and we can all learn and develop organizing skills together. So please let us keep pushing back. Do not believe that the battle has already been decided. It has not. It has not. And let's go down fighting if we have to go down. And maybe let's do something else. That was
All right.
the extra 33 minutes. Okay, I think this is when we all get kicked off.
All right, I'll close it out. Thank you.
Thank you.